Here we go again. Democrats celebrate another self-proclaimed troublemaker. Good evening, everyone. I'm Haylee Ficuciello. Well, here we go again. Another election cycle, another progressive celebration party, another Democratic Socialist candidate promising to shake things up in Washington because apparently the last several years of chaos, division, dysfunction, inflation, protests, government spending explosion, and nonstop political theater just wasn't quite enough for the activist wing for the Democratic Party. This time, the spotlight lands on Pennsylvania State Representative Chris Rabb, who cruised to victory in the Democratic primary for Pennsylvania 3rd Congressional District, a district so overwhelmingly Democratic that Republicans may as well save the campaign money and just mail a sympathy card. And naturally, the progressive political adventures assemble immediately. The endorsements came pouring in from the usual candidates of ideological revolutionaries. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ileana Omar, and Maxwell Frost, because when Americans think effective governance, naturally they think of lawmakers who spent half their careers live streaming outrage on social media, while others half is dedicated to blaming capitalism for literally everything short of bad weather. Rabb also received support from Ro Khan and Chris Van Hollen, further proof that progressive wing of the Democratic Party is no longer a fringe movement quietly operating in the background. It is increasingly becoming the Democratic Party itself. And perhaps the most revealing moments of Rabb's campaign came from when he openly described himself as, quote, the troublemaker. Not a reformer, not a consensus builder, not a fiscal watchdog, not somebody promising to unite voters, a troublemaker. Well, mission accomplished. Washington already has plenty of those. Apparently, the modern qualifications for Congress is no longer legislative accomplishments, policy expertise, or bipartisan leadership. Now the job description reads more like must generate viral clips, must attack the system, must create outrage online, and perfectly must have endorsements from every activist organization capable of turning a protest chant into a fundraising email. And speaking of activist organizations, the Democratic Socialists of America proudly threw their support behind Rabb, calling him their second congressional endorsement of the election cycle. That alone should tell voters exactly where the movement is heading. The Democratic Socialists of America, once treated as the radical fringe political organization, are now openly helping shape congressional races inside America's two major political parties. Think about that for a moment. The word socialist used to be politically radioactive in American politics. Now it's practically a badge of honor amongst part of the activist left. And what exactly does modern democratic socialist movement stand for? Massive government expansion, aggressive wealth redistribution, higher taxes, government-controlled healthcare systems, climate policies carrying trillion-dollar price tags, expanding federal dependency programs, student loan cancellations, rent integration policies, defunding or radically restructuring police institutions, and increasingly hostility towards capitalism itself, the very economic system that built modern American economy. But according to the activist lefts, the problem with America isn't government failure. No. According to them, the government simply hasn't become large enough yet. Apparently, the solution to inflation is more spending. The solution to division is more identity politics. The solution to crime is fewer consequences. And the solution to national debt, well, nobody knows anymore. But don't worry, the taxpayers will figure it out eventually. Chris Rabb's victory also highlights another growing reality inside the Democratic Party. Moderation is disappearing. Centrist Democrats are increasingly becoming pushed aside in favor of activist candidates who campaign less like traditional lawmakers and more like political influencers. The modern progressive formula is simple: create outrage, attack institutions, use social media constantly, frame every disagreement as opposition, and promise transformation. Lots and lots of transformation, because apparently what Philadelphia residents struggle with is crime, inflation, public safety concerns, drug problems, and economic uncertainty. Really wanted was another politician promising shaking things up. How's that strategy working nationally so far? Americans are paying dramatically more for groceries than they were a few years ago. Housing affordability has collapsed in many urban areas. Interest rates skyrocket after years of inflation pressures. Border security remains one of the most divisive issues in the country. Public trust in institutions continue to decline, and yet the activist lists continue to act through Americans' biggest problem is the Congress simply isn't progressive enough. Now, to be fair, Rabb supporters view him as an outspoken reformer willing to challenge systems and political chaos. That is the charitable interpretation. The less charitable interpretation, Washington is about to receive another member of what critics increasingly describe as a performance politics chaos. Politicians who dominate headliners, social media feeds, and cable news interviews while accomplishing relatively little legislation. And let's be honest here. The squad branding of politics has become less about governing and more about perpetual outrage marketing. Every week, there's a new dramatic declaration. America is collapsing, democracy is ending, capitalism is evil, the system is broken, the revolution is coming, and somehow, despite holding office for years, the solution remains exactly the same. More federal spending, more federal control, more ideological activism. Then came another eyebrow raised moment during the Rabb's campaign. Rabb appeared publicly with the left-wing internet personality Hassan Piker, a controversial online political commentator who has faced backlash over inflammatory statements, including previous remarks that the United States deserved 9/11. Now, Rabb later claimed he wasn't aware of Piker's past controversies before associating with him, which raises two possibilities. Either he genuinely didn't know, or modern political campaigns have become so obsessed with influencer culture, campaigns are now partnering with first and researching later. Neither explanation is especially comforting. Rabb also dismissed concerns about appearing alongside controversial figures by comparing it to politicians appearing on programs hosted by figures like Bill Maher and Joe Rogan. And there it is again, the modern political deflection strategy. Nobody addresses controversy direct anymore. Instead, the response is always, well, what about the other side? No accountability, no standards, just endless political pointing your finger game. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans watch this spectacle are left wondering whether Congress still functions as a governing institution or whether it fully transformed into a 24-hour content creation machine. Because increasingly, politics resemble reality television with voting privileges, and nowhere is the transformation more obvious than within deep blue districts where ideological primaries have become purity contests. Candidates compete to prove who is more progressive, who is more activist, who is more anti-establishment, who is more willing to fight the system. And ironically, many of these candidates have spent years inside the government institutions they claim are failing. At some point, voters are reasonably asked, if the system is so broken and you've been in office for years, exactly who is to blame? But perhaps the biggest irony of all, many progressive politicians campaigns as revolutionaries while operating comfortably inside one of the most powerful political systems on earth. They attack capitalism while benefiting from the enormous media exposure, campaign funding networks, book deals, celebrity endorsements, and digital influence made possible by capitalism markets. They condemn wealth inequalities while flying across countries attending high dollar fundraising events. They attack corporate greed while relying heavily on corporate owned social media platforms to build political brands. And somehow, despite constant claims of being silenced, they figure dominate headlines nearly every single day. Quite the silence campaign. Now, politically speaking, Rabb's victory may not dramatically change the balance of power in Congress immediately. Pennsylvania 3rd District is heavily Democrat, and whoever wins the Democratic primary is widely expected to win the seat outright. But symbolically, this matters because it reflects the continued ideological transformation of the Democratic Party. The activist wing is growing louder. more organized, more aggressive, and increasingly influential in determining the party's direction moving forward. The question for Democrats is whether the strategy ultimately helps or hurts nationally. Progressive activists believe America is demanding radical change. Critics argue the movement is pulling Democrats further away from moderate working class voters concerned primarily with affordability, public safety, border security, and economic stability. And judging by recent political volatility nationwide, voters themselves appear deeply divided over which direction the country should take. But one thing is certain, the era of moderate, middle of the road Democratic politics appear to be fading rapidly in many urban strongholds. Instead, the loudest voice increasingly belonged to ideological activists, social media driven politicians, and candidates proudly embracing labels that previously generations of Democrats would avoid entirely. So, yes, here we are again, another self described troublemaker. American Democratic Socialist backed campaign, another celebration from the activist left, another promise of shaking things up. Meanwhile, millions of Americans continue asking a very simple question. At what point does all the political performance actually improve everyday life of ordinary citizens? Because outrage may trend online, activists may dominate cable news, and social media clips may generate applause from ideological supporters, but eventually, voters still expect results, and well, that's my take. I'm Haley Ficuciello for Englebrook Independent News. Thank you for watching, and good night.